A paralyzed mafia boss who hadn't felt his legs in 20 years, a 6-year-old girl who knocked on his gate in the middle of a snowstorm asking for leftovers. And the moment she touched him, everything he believed about power, survival, and what it means to be human shattered in an instant. Stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The snow came down in silence, the way it always did in the hills above Seoul. Not gentle, not beautiful, but relentless. It packed itself against the iron fence posts and buried the security cameras under a half-inch of white until the lenses looked like blind eyes staring at nothing. The guards inside the booth at the main gate had the heater cranked so high that the windows were fogged solid. They weren't watching the monitors. They were watching each other play cards. Nobody expected anyone to come up that road on a night like this. The estate sat at the top of a private lane carved into the eastern slope of Bugak-san, a hill that most of Seoul didn't know existed because the city had quietly erased it from publicly available maps 6 years ago. That erasure cost the Black Dragon Syndicate approximately 400 million won in bribes distributed across 3 separate municipal offices. It was worth every coin. The chairman didn't want to be found. He had not wanted to be found in a very long time. Inside the main residence, which was built from reinforced concrete and black volcanic stone and covered with enough security glass to stop a .50 caliber round, Kang Tae-jin sat at the head of a dining table long enough to seat 18 people. Tonight, as most nights, he sat alone. The kitchen staff had prepared grilled black cod with miso glaze, hand-pulled noodles in a short rib broth that had been simmering since the previous afternoon, a pickled vegetable tower that the head chef had apparently spent 40 minutes arranging, and a dessert involving yuzu cream and crystallized ginger that smelled like something out of a hotel in Tokyo. 3 different wines had been uncorked. 2 remained untouched. Tae-jin had eaten perhaps 6 bites of the fish before he pushed the plate away and reached for his cigarettes. He was 45 years old, and he looked it in the way that men who have lived entirely through their will and very little through their body tend to look it. Hard around the jaw, hollowed somewhere behind the eyes, the skin of his hands marked by a faint web of old scars that had been there so long they'd stopped registering as damage and simply become part of the landscape. His hair was still black, still cut short, still refusing to give up a single strand to gray despite everything he had put his body through over the past 2 decades. His body was otherwise ruined. From the waist down, Kang Tae-jin was a man living inside a coffin he hadn't died in yet. The wheelchair sat beside him like a second self. Matte black, titanium frame, custom-fitted by a German orthotics company that charged more for a single chair than most Korean families earned in 3 years. Tae-jin had owned 11 of them since the shooting. He had destroyed 4. One he'd thrown off the 3rd floor of a hospital building in Busan after the 3rd surgeon in a row told him the damage was permanent. The nurse below had narrowly avoided becoming a murder victim. The surgeon had not been wrong. He lit the cigarette, let the smoke settle in his throat. Through the dining room's floor-to-ceiling window, he could see the garden beneath its white blanket, and beyond the garden, the outer wall, and beyond the outer wall, nothing. Just darkness and the faint orange glow of the city spread out below him like something spilled and never cleaned up. Seoul. 8 million people who didn't know his name. Or rather, 8 million people who knew exactly what his name meant and had decided, collectively and wisely, to pretend they didn't. The Black Dragon Syndicate had existed for 31 years. Tae-jin had not founded it. He had taken it, at 23, through methods that still got discussed in certain rooms when men wanted to illustrate the distance between reckless ambition and something colder and more durable. The founder, a man named Park Chul-ho, had been found in the Han River with his shoes still on. That detail, the shoes, had become something of a legend. People who didn't know Tae-jin personally always got the story slightly wrong. They thought the shoes were symbolic. They weren't. It had simply been winter, and Tae-jin had not wanted to carry them home. He was 23 years old when he did that. He was 25 when he extended the syndicate's operations into Japan. 27 when he opened distribution channels through Vladivostok. 30 when a coalition of Taiwanese and mainland Chinese organizations tried to absorb his operation, and he responded by dismantling their Seoul infrastructure entirely over the course of a single, very efficient weekend. By 32, he controlled pharmaceutical distribution, port freight, private security licensing, and 4 legitimate construction companies that won government contracts with the kind of consistency that suggested the bidding process was something of a formality. None of that had stopped the bullet. It came on a Tuesday evening in March, 20 years ago, outside a restaurant in Gangnam. Two gunmen, motorcycle, modified pistols firing in sequence. The first shot missed. The second took him in the shoulder. The third, the one that did the real work, entered through his lower back as he was turning and fractured two vertebrae before lodging against the third. He was told later that the surgeons had spent 6 hours discussing whether removing the fragment would kill him or simply deepen the paralysis. They decided not to remove it. He spent 4 months in a private medical facility in Switzerland under an assumed name and came home in the wheelchair and had been in it ever since. His wife, Shin Ji-won, had visited him in Switzerland twice. The second visit had been to tell him she was leaving. She'd brought her lawyer. Taejin had not responded to either the announcement or the lawyer. He'd simply looked out the window at the Alps until they left. He heard later through intermediaries that she had remarried. A man in the shipping industry, legitimate, Busan family, 3 children eventually. He did not wish her harm. He did not wish her anything. She had made a reasonable decision, and he respected reasonable decisions. That was 20 years ago. Since then, he had survived 2 more assassination attempts, a governmental investigation that lasted 14 months before quietly collapsing, the deaths of 4 of his longest-serving lieutenants, and the gradual defection of 3 organizations that had once paid tribute to the syndicate and had calculated, apparently, that a man in a wheelchair was an acceptable risk to bet against. 2 of those organizations no longer existed. The third had recalculated. None of it had required him to stand up. He took another drag of the cigarette. The cod sat congealing on the plate in front of him, its glaze going dull under the dining room's low light. The chef, a man named Baek Sung-min, who had trained in Paris and considered himself something of an artist, would be devastated. Taejin didn't particularly care about Baek Sung-min's feelings, but he did feel a vague, abstract irritation at the waist. He pushed the plate further away. The intercom on the wall crackled. "Chairman?" It was Ryu Dong-hyun, his head of security, a man built like a shipping container and approximately as expressive. "There is a situation at the main gate." Taejin looked at the intercom. "Define situation." A pause that was slightly too long. "A child, sir." "A child." "Yes, sir. A small child. She—" Another pause. Ryu Dong-hyun was not a man who paused. "She knocked on the gate." Taejin looked at the window, at the snow, at the darkness beyond the outer wall. "How old?" "Our estimate is 5 or 6. She's very small. She's been standing at the gate for approximately 4 minutes. She knocked twice and then she waited. She is—" Ryu stopped. "She appears to be alone, Chairman." "In this weather?" "Yes, sir." Taejin stubbed out the cigarette on the edge of the wine glass, a habit his personal staff had given up correcting 3 years ago, and turned the wheelchair toward the window. He couldn't see the gate from here. The garden was in the way, and beyond the garden the outer wall, and the gate was on the far side of the outer wall, where the lane ended and the road began. He couldn't see anything. He was looking at snow. "What does she want?" "She asked to speak with the owner of the house, sir." Those were her words. Owner of the house. She said she had a— He could hear Ryu choosing words with the kind of care a man uses when he suspects the words will not land well. "A proposal." Taejin stared at the window for a long moment. "Show me." The security feed came up on the tablet his aide kept on the side table by his chair, the full exterior grid, 16 cameras, most of them showing nothing but snow and darkness and the empty lane. Gate camera 7 showed the main entrance. He found it and enlarged it. The girl was small. Smaller than the word small could really account for. She was standing directly in front of the gate, not holding on to it, not pressing her face against the bars the way children in films do. Just standing, upright, shoulders back. She was wearing a pink coat that had seen better days, the kind of coat that had been washed so many times the original color had faded to something closer to the memory of pink than the thing itself. Her feet were in sneakers that were not appropriate for this weather. There was snow on her shoulders and on the top of her head, which was covered in tight black coils of hair that the snow was settling into like it had found a home. She appeared to be approximately 6 years old. She was black. Her face, even through the grainy resolution of a gate camera in a snowstorm, was completely calm. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She was simply standing at the iron gate of the most heavily secured private residence in the northern hills of Seoul at 11:43 on a Tuesday night in January, as if she had an appointment. Taejin looked at her face on the screen for a full 30 seconds. "Let her in," he said. The silence on the other end of the intercom had a texture to it. "Chairman, bring her inside the outer gate. Keep her in the guardhouse. Do not touch her. I want Yoon here in 20 minutes. Dr. Yoon So-hyun, his personal physician. Call her now." "Yes, sir." He put the tablet down and reached for another cigarette, and then stopped, the cigarette between his fingers, and looked at the blank screen of the darkened tablet where the girl's face had been. "A proposal," Ryu had said. He lit the cigarette anyway. By the time they brought her into the guardhouse and activated the interior camera so he could watch the feed on his tablet, Amara Brooks had been given a blanket and a cup of hot water and had accepted both without apparent surprise, as though being received at a criminal estate in the middle of a snowstorm was simply the natural outcome of knocking politely on someone's gate. She sat in the plastic chair inside the heated booth with the blanket around her shoulders and both hands wrapped around the paper cup, and she looked at the guards around her with those dark, level eyes, and she didn't say a word. One of the guards, a younger man, Song Jae-won, who Taejin had always thought was slightly too soft for the work, but kept around because he was excellent with surveillance equipment, crouched down in front of her and asked in Korean where her parents were. The girl looked at him without blinking. "My mom is working," she said, in English. Her English had the flat, slightly tilted quality of someone learning to talk in a second city. Not quite American, not quite anything else yet. "She works at 3 places on Tuesday." "It's very late," Song said, switching to halting English. "And it's snowing." "I know," the girl said. She wasn't argumentative about it. She was just accurate. "Are you cold?" She considered this with what appeared to be genuine seriousness. "My feet are a little cold, but I'm okay." "What's your name?" "Amara Brooks." "How old are you, Amara?" 6. Then after a moment, "And 3/4. Song looked over his shoulder at the senior guard and then back at the girl. "You said you have a proposal." "I need to talk to the owner," she said. "The owner of this house." "Yes." She looked at Song with an expression of patient and mild confusion, as though she was wondering why he kept repeating things back to her when the content was not unclear. "I have something he needs, and he has something I need. That's a trade. My grandma said the word for that is a proposal." She paused. "Or maybe an arrangement. She used both." Song looked at the senior guard again. The senior guard looked at the ceiling. Taejin watched all of this on the tablet from the dining room where he had not moved. He finished the cigarette. He looked at the untouched wine glasses. He looked at the cold plate of cod. He pressed the intercom. "Bring her to me." The look on Ryu's face when he appeared in the dining room doorway with Amara Brooks beside him, a tiny figure in a faded pink coat standing approximately level with Ryu's belt buckle, still with the blanket around her shoulders, still holding what was now an empty paper cup, was an expression Taejin had never seen on the man's face in 11 years of service. It was not quite discomfort. It was not quite absurdity. It was the face of a man who has encountered a situation for which none of his training has prepared him, and is now relying entirely on the fact that someone else is technically in charge. Amara stepped past Ryu into the dining room and looked at the table. The spread of food, the untouched wine, the cold fish, the sculptural vegetable arrangement, the yuzu dessert, registered in her expression first as confusion and then as something that moved quickly across her face before she put it away. She looked at Taejin. He looked at her. "Sit down," he said. She pulled out the chair closest to her. It was 3 chairs away from him, on the long side of the table, and climbed into it. Her feet didn't reach the floor. She set the empty paper cup in front of her with the slightly deliberate care of someone choosing where to put something when they aren't sure of the rules. "You said you have a proposal," Taejin said. His English was precise and slightly formal, learned in his 30s from business dealings that required it. "Yes." She looked at him. Not at the wheelchair, or rather, she looked at the wheelchair the same way she looked at everything else, which was to say directly and without particular comment. "You can't walk." "That's correct." 20 years, she said. He went very still. "Where did you hear that?" "My grandma told me," she said. "She told me about you before she died. She said there was a man in the hills who couldn't walk and who had a very sad heart, and that one day I might be able to help him." She put her hands flat on the table. They were tiny hands. She was from this neighborhood a long time ago. She used to walk past this hill. Taejin looked at her for a long moment. He was not a man who was accustomed to being the subject of someone else's story. He was accustomed to being the one who decided what the story was. Your grandmother knew about me. She knew about a lot of things, Amara said simply. She said the knowing came to her sometimes. She said I might have it too. She paused. I'm not totally sure about that part, but I thought I should try. Try what? Taejin said. I think I can help your legs, she said. The dining room was very quiet. Through the reinforced window he could hear nothing. No wind, no traffic, no sound at all, just the sealed silence of a room that cost 3 times its square footage in soundproofing. Ryu was still in the doorway. Taejin could feel the man's discomfort from across the room like a low-grade heat. That, Taejin said carefully, is not possible. Maybe, the girl agreed. She did not seem troubled by the possibility of impossibility. But I thought I should try. My grandma said the people who never try aren't wrong about what can't happen. They're just the people who never find out what can. Taejin looked at her. He had been looked at by prosecutors, by rival chairmen, by the surgeon in Switzerland, by his wife and her lawyer. He had been looked at across the barrel of 2 different guns and lived. He did not know what it was about this child's gaze, perfectly direct, entirely without agenda, stripped of anything except a kind of focused, serious attention, that made something in his chest move in a way that he registered as almost physical discomfort. And in exchange, he said, "What do you need?" She glanced at the table, at the untouched food, at the cold fish and the noodles and the vegetables and the dessert. When she looked back at him, her expression had not changed, but there was something behind it now that she was trying, with the limited tools of a 6-year-old, to keep from being too visible. I haven't eaten in 2 days, she said. My mom has been working a lot and she forgot to shop, I think. And we don't have very much money right now. She doesn't know I came here. She'd probably be very upset. A pause. I just need enough food to not be hungry. For me and for her, for when she gets home. She doesn't get home until after 2. Taejin looked at the table. At 11 courses of food prepared by a chef who considered himself an artist. At the untouched wine. At the cold fish. He looked back at the girl. And in exchange for this food, he said slowly, you believe you can help me walk. I think so, she said. Yes. That sounds like a very bad trade for you. She tilted her head slightly, considering this. My grandma said a trade is only bad if the thing you're giving costs you something you can't get back. I don't think helping you will cost me anything. She looked at him with those direct, unreadable eyes. But the food would mean a lot. He sat there, 20 years in the chair, 11 custom wheelchairs, 4 months in Switzerland, 14 specialists across 6 countries. He had spent, at last honest count, something close to 800 million won on treatments, experimental procedures, spinal cord research donations that were partly charitable and partly the act of a man who wanted someone, somewhere, to solve a problem so that when the solution arrived he would be first in line. He had done 3 months of aquatherapy in Jeju and 4 months of electrical stimulation treatment in Tokyo and had microdosing trials in a clinic outside Zurich that operated in a space the Swiss government had quietly agreed not to examine too closely. He had felt nothing. In 20 years below the waist, he had felt precisely nothing. Ryu, he said, Chairman, tell the kitchen to prepare fresh food, everything, hot, for 2. He paused. And a bag she can take with her. Ryu looked at him. Ryu did not question orders. He had not questioned an order in 11 years. But for approximately 2 seconds, he looked at his employer with an expression of deeply controlled bewilderment before he said, Yes, sir, and left the room. Taejin looked back at Amara. Eat first, he said. You said 2 days. Yes. Then you try your proposal. He reached for another cigarette and stopped himself, for the first time in a very long time, without deciding to stop. He just stopped. You understand that this will almost certainly not work. I understand that you think that, she said politely. Despite himself, despite everything, the corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the muscular memory of something that had been a smile once and was now mostly just a reflex. The kitchen staff, when the order came through, produced a fresh dinner in under 20 minutes, with the controlled panic of people who understood that their employers' moods were not something to interpret, and that if the chairman wanted dinner remade at midnight, they would remake dinner at midnight without discussion. Baek Sung-min himself appeared briefly in the doorway to the dining room to assess the situation and retreated without making eye contact. Amara Brooks ate with the focused, unself-conscious hunger of someone who is not performing hunger but simply experiencing it. She ate the noodle broth first, both hands on the bowl, and then the fish, and then the vegetables, and then most of the dessert. She ate without speaking. Taejin sat across the table from her and smoked one cigarette and watched. And what he watched was not the eating itself, but the quality of her attention, the way she was fully present in the act, the way nothing distracted her from it, the way she did not look around the room calculating its contents or assessing the man sitting across from her. She was simply eating. When she was finished, she placed her chopsticks carefully at the edge of the plate and looked up at him. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," he said. Words that came from some earlier version of himself, from before the chair, from the years when courtesy had occasionally been useful as currency. "Are you ready?" "Yes?" She got down from the chair, walked around the table toward him. Her sneakers, still damp from the snow, he noticed, left faint wet prints on the stone floor. She stopped in front of the wheelchair, looked at his legs. "Can I?" She extended both hands slightly, palms up. The question was clear. He looked at her hands. Then he looked at his legs, which were covered by the dark fabric of his trousers, which he wore not because he needed them for warmth. The estate was heated to a precise 22 degrees, but because he had learned a long time ago that people's faces when they saw the atrophy were something he preferred not to deal with on a regular basis. "Go ahead," he said. She placed both hands on his knees, lightly. The weight of her hands was almost nothing, a pressure he registered more as warmth than as weight, the ambient heat of a small body conducting itself through his trousers. He felt nothing. Of course he felt nothing. He hadn't felt anything below his waist in 20 years, and the hands of a 6-year-old on his kneecaps were not going to change that. And the fact that he had let this happen, had let a child into his estate, fed her, sat across from her, allowed this, was a sign of something he would need to consider when he was alone. Some breach in the perimeter of his thinking that he had not previously known was there. He was in the middle of formulating this thought when it happened. It started at his left knee. Not pain. Pain he knew. Pain he had made his peace with in its various forms. This was different. It was heat, moving inward from the surface of his skin, not the external warmth of her hands, but something that came from beneath, from muscle, from bone, from the geography of a body he had spent 20 years ceasing to be interested in. The heat moved upward along the inside of his thigh, and downward along his shins simultaneously, and when it reached his foot he felt, for the first time in 20 years, the floor. Not through his shoe, not as a vibration he was aware of through his seat. He felt the floor. He felt the specific temperature of stone under the thin rubber sole of his shoe. He felt the faint, uneven texture of the grout line between tiles. He felt his own foot pressing down against a surface that was solid and real and present. He gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. Amara was still looking at his legs. Her expression had not changed. She looked precisely the way she'd looked when she was eating, present, focused, unsurprised by what was in front of her. "I can feel that," Taejin said. His voice was very quiet. She looked up at him. "I know," she said. "That—" He stopped. He could feel his left leg. Not completely, not the full, unqualified sensation of a body working as it was supposed to, but something, pressure, temperature, the faint electrical whisper of nerves that he had been told were permanently silent, conducting something through the dark. He reached down and pressed his own hand against his left thigh. He felt his hand. He sat for a long time without speaking, pressing his palm against his own leg, which was something he had not done in 2 decades because there had been nothing to press against that responded to pressing. And something was happening in his chest that was not cardiac. He was certain enough of that to table the concern, but that made breathing slightly difficult in a way he could not account for by any physiological mechanism he understood. Amara took her hands off his knees. The sensation dimmed but did not disappear, like a radio turned down but not off. "It'll be stronger tomorrow," she said. "My grandma said that's how it works. The first time just opens the door." He looked at her. He was aware that his face was doing something he could not fully control, which was not a condition he had experienced in any context he could remember for the past 15 years. He forced it still. "You should go home," he said. "Your mother—" "She doesn't know I left," Amara said. She picked up the bag that had been packed by the kitchen. It sat by the door, 2 full paper bags of food that the staff had prepared without comment or visible reaction because their survival instincts were well developed. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said. "Same time, okay? You just need to feel it every day for a while. My grandma said it takes about a week before it really holds. Your grandmother said a great deal. She was very smart, Amara said seriously. She went to the door and stopped, turned back to look at him. In the light of the dining room, she looked impossibly small against the stone and dark wood and silence of the space around her. She looked like something that had wandered in from a different story. Are you going to be okay tonight? He stared at her. I've managed 20 years. I know, she said. That's kind of why I asked. Then she was gone. Ryu appearing from nowhere to escort her to the gate, and the sound of the outer door closing, and the snow outside, and the city below. And Tae-jin sitting alone in the dining room with both hands on his own legs, pressing down, feeling the specific and undeniable warmth of his own blood moving through flesh that had been dead to him since he was 25 years old. He sat there for a very long time. He did not sleep that night. Not at all. Not the fractured pharmaceutical-assisted few hours he usually managed. Not anything. He sat in the dark in the main living room with the lights off and Soul spread out below him and his hands on his knees, cycling through the sensation every 20 minutes to check if it was still there, if it had been a dream. If the whole evening had been some elaborate psychological event produced by a brain finally deciding to manufacture sensations that the body could no longer deliver. It was still there. Dimmer than it had been when she was touching him, but present. At 3 a.m, he called Dr. Yoon Seo-hyun, who answered because she always answered, because she had been his physician for 9 years, and her relationship with normal sleeping hours was something that had been negotiated away one midnight emergency at a time. I need you here at 7, he said. A pause. Are you? I'm not hurt, he said. I need you to run the standard neurological assessment, all of it. Another pause, shorter. Dr. Yoon was excellent at her job, which included knowing when to ask questions and when not to. 7, she said. I'll bring the portable. He hung up, sat in the dark, pressed his palm against his left knee and felt again the answering warmth. Amara Brooks, 6 3/4, had eaten his food and offered him something that 11 specialists and 800 million won had been unable to provide, and had then collected 2 paper bags of groceries and walked back out into the snow as though the whole transaction had been perfectly ordinary. She had not asked for payment. She had not asked for anything beyond the food, which she had been owed the moment she sat down at his table hungry and 2 days empty. She had not been afraid of him. Not his name, not his estate, not the guards, not his face, not the chair. He could not remember the last time someone had not been afraid of him. At 6:57 in the morning, 13 minutes before Dr. Yoon arrived, Ryu entered the room to deliver the daily security briefing and stopped in the doorway. Tae-jin was at the window, standing, upright, both hands gripping the window frame, white-knuckled, legs shaking so badly that the fabric of his trousers was trembling visibly. His jaw was set. His face was gray with effort and pain. He had been standing for 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and had been maintaining it through a combination of grip strength and the same quality of will that had built an empire and destroyed 3 organizations and survived 2 bullets and 4 months in Switzerland, and he was not going to sit down. Ryu said nothing. He stood in the doorway. After a moment, he set the briefing folder on the side table and left the room without making a sound. At 7:15, Dr. Yoon Seo-hyun stood in the living room with her portable nerve conduction equipment and looked at the readouts on her tablet, and looked at Kang Tae-jin, and looked at the readouts again with the expression of a woman whose entire professional understanding of the human body was currently being renegotiated in real time. These numbers are not possible, she said. And yet, he said, the L3 and L4 are Tae-jin. These pathways have been clinically dormant for 20 years. I have the original Swiss reports. I have every scan we've done for the past 9 years. These pathways were not conducting. She looked at the tablet. They are conducting. He was sitting in his wheelchair now. He had sat back down when Yoon arrived, partly because the standing had taken everything he had, and partly because he did not want her professional composure further disrupted. She needed to be clear. I know, he said. What happened? He looked at the window, at the gray morning light on the garden below. There was still snow on the grass, but the path to the gate had been cleared. His staff had salted it at first light, as they always did, and he could see, if he looked carefully, the small wet footprints that the morning's salting had not quite managed to erase before it refroze. Small, child-sized, leading to the gate. I had a visitor last night, he said. Whatever was coming next, neither of them knew yet that by that same evening, By the time the sun went down on Seoul and the city's news cycle completed its first rotation, the footprints would be irrelevant because the street below the estate would be impassable. That the story would have moved faster than either of them could track. That Amara Brooks' name, which Tae Jin had not yet released to anyone, which existed only inside the security logs of the estate, would somehow be everywhere. That the crowds would come before the girl did, and the rival organizations would come with them, and that the brief and fragile window of whatever this was, whatever had happened between an old criminal and a hungry child in a dining room at midnight, was already closing faster than either of them knew how to stop. He could feel his legs. That was all he had for now. The rest was coming, and it was coming in force, and neither of them were ready for it. The news broke at 9:47 in the morning, and by 10:15 the first satellite van had parked at the bottom of the private lane. Tae-jin knew because Ryu told him, and Ryu told him in the flat, precise way he delivered all information that he considered structurally threatening. Standing in the doorway, both hands at his sides, zero inflection, the words arranged in the order they needed to be in, and not one word beyond that. One van, KBS affiliate, camera crew of 3. They had not attempted to enter the lane. They were simply there. How? Tae-jin said. We don't know yet. Someone on the staff. Possibly, or the girl was seen arriving last night. The gate camera angle there's a sight line from the public road if you know where to look. Ryu paused. We're reviewing the logs. Tae-jin was at his desk in the study, the room he actually worked from, as opposed to the formal office which existed for meetings with people he needed to impress with the idea of formality. The study was smaller, darker, stacked with folders and encrypted hard drives and 2 laptops running simultaneously, and it smelled like cigarettes and the specific dust of a room where a man has spent too many hours alone making decisions that affected people who would never know his name. Dr. Yoon was still in the house. She was in the medical room down the hall, reviewing her scans for the 3rd time, and every 30 minutes or so she appeared in the study doorway to say something like, "The L4 response is holding," or "I've never seen baseline recovery this fast," or simply to stand there looking at the readouts on her tablet with the expression of someone who has spent 20 years building a professional architecture of certainty and is now watching large sections of it slide into the ocean. One van, Tae-jin said. Call Minister Bae. Tell him the lane is private property and any media presence within 200 meters is a trespass issue. Yes, sir. Ryu didn't move, which meant there was more. What? The KBS crew is not the concern, Ryu said. He reached into the folder under his arm and produced a single photograph. Printed, not digital, which meant it had come through their secure courier network rather than any channel that could be remotely accessed. He set it on the desk. This came in from our Mapo contact 40 minutes ago. It was taken at 5 this morning. Tae-jin looked at this photograph. It was grainy, shot on a long lens in poor light, but the subject was identifiable. A black SUV parked in the alley behind the convenience store on Bugak-san-gil, 2 blocks from the estate's service entrance. The plates were blurred, but the vehicle profile was recognizable to anyone who had spent years cataloging the operational preferences of Seoul's organized families. It was a Hwang vehicle, Hwang Sung-do's People, the Tiger Claw organization which operated out of Mapo and Yeongdongpo and had spent the last 4 years positioning itself as the primary challenger to Black Dragon's port freight contracts. One car, Tae-jin said. That we photographed. He looked at Ryu. How many do you think? Reconnaissance in a situation like this, Ryu chose his words. They'd want at minimum 3 points of observation. One at the service entrance, one on the main road approach, one static, probably elevated, watching the front of the estate. He paused. Hwang moves carefully. He wouldn't send just surveillance if he was serious. He'd want eyes on the target first. The target, Tae-jin said. You mean the child? Yes, sir. He looked at the photograph for another moment. Then he set it face down on the desk and turned to the window. The snow from the previous night had stopped, and the morning was the kind of bright gray that Seoul produced in January. Not quite cloudy, not quite clear, a flat, colorless light that made everything look like it was waiting for something to happen. Hwang's been watching us since when? He said. The photograph is time-stamped 5:12 a.m., Ryu said. If they moved before dawn, they knew about the girl before the news did. Which means our leak isn't a camera angle, Tae-jin said. The leak is inside. The silence in the room had a different quality after that. Ryu stood very still. He was not the kind of man who became visibly uncomfortable. His face was structured by long practice and some fundamental characteristic of his personality to remain neutral across a remarkably wide range of provocations. But there was something in the set of his shoulders right now that Taijin recognized as the physical register of a man calculating his own exposure. "I want the staff list from last night," Taijin said. "Everyone who was on premises. Kitchen, security rotation, maintenance, anyone who ran a vehicle in or out after 9 p.m. Full list, cross-referenced with known external contacts, on my desk by noon." "Yes, sir. And I want a second perimeter established. Quietly. No visible escalation on the outer walls, yes. I don't want the media filming us fortifying. That tells Huang we're aware. But I want overlapping coverage on all 4 approaches, and I want someone watching the watchers." He turned back from the window. "Who do we have in Mapo right now with access to Huang's operational structure?" "Park Chun-hee. She's been embedded with the Tiger Claw Logistics for 8 months. Get her on the phone this afternoon. I want to know who gave the order to surveil, and I want to know what Huang thinks the girl is worth to him." Ryu picked up the face-down photograph. "What is she worth?" he said. Not quite a question, the kind of statement that expects clarification. Taijin looked at him for a long moment. "Get the list," he said. Dr. Yoon appeared in the doorway at 10:55, still holding her tablet, still wearing the expression of a scientist in active negotiation with her own data. She looked at Ryu's retreating back and then at Taijin. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear it without making a decision about it for at least 30 seconds. That's not how I operate." "I know," she said. 30 seconds anyway." She came into the study and turned the tablet toward him. The screen showed a nerve conduction graph. 2 lines overlaid, one labeled Baseline 2016 in red, one labeled Today in blue. The red line was nearly flat across its entire length, the kind of reading that indicated, in the clinical language she had explained to him years ago, the approximate neurological activity of an inert material. The blue line moved, not dramatically, not the clean peaks of a fully functioning nervous system, but it moved in a pattern that showed response, that showed signal traveling from origin point to terminus and completing the journey. The L3 through L5 pathways, she said, all 3 showing active conduction. This is not residual stimulation from whatever happened last night. This is sustained. It's been 6 hours, and the readings have not degraded. He looked at the graph. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said carefully, "that something has changed in your spinal cord that should not have been able to change based on everything I know about spinal cord injury recovery." She put the tablet down. "I've spent the last 2 hours pulling literature. There are documented cases, extremely rare, poorly understood, of partial spontaneous recovery in incomplete spinal cord injuries occurring years after initial trauma. The mechanism is not fully understood. There are theories about dormant axonal pathways, about neuroplasticity operating on much longer timescales than we previously believed." She looked at him. "Your injury was classified as incomplete. There was always a technical possibility." "Yoon?" "Yes." "Is this the child?" She held his gaze. "I cannot tell you that a 6-year-old touching your knees restored neurological function that 3 Swiss specialists and 9 years of my care could not produce." She stopped. "I also cannot tell you that the timing is coincidental. Those are the same statement." "Yes," she said. "I know." He looked at the graph, the blue line moving across the screen, doing what it was not supposed to be able to do. "She's coming back tonight," he said. "I know." Yoon picked up her tablet. "I want to be here when she does. I want to run a baseline on her before she touches you again, with your permission. She's 6. I'm aware. Non-invasive only. Observation. I want to see what her own readings look like. Baseline heart rate, galvanic response, any measurable biological change in her during the process." She paused. "If something is happening here that has a mechanism, I want to find it. And if it doesn't have a mechanism..." She stopped again. "Then what?" he said. She looked out the window at the flat gray morning. "Then I'll need a few more days to rearrange how I think about things," she said. By noon, there were 4 satellite vans. By 2 in the afternoon, the count was 11, and they had been joined by a crowd that Ryu's exterior team estimated at somewhere between 200 and 300 people. A mix of journalists, curiosity seekers, and a growing cluster of individuals who had clearly not come for the spectacle. Families, people in wheelchairs, People being helped out of vehicles by relatives, moving slowly, carefully, with the deliberate movement of bodies that require deliberateness. A woman on crutches who stood at the edge of the crowd with both hands wrapped around the metal grips, and her eyes fixed on the estate gates with an expression that Tae-jin's exterior camera captured clearly enough that he could read it from across the distance. He looked at that face on the monitor for a long time. He didn't know how the story had reached them so quickly. The leak, whoever it was, had apparently not simply tipped off a news affiliate. They had given someone enough detail for the story to travel, which meant the leak was not casual. It was not an employee who mentioned something to a neighbor. Someone had deliberately released the information, in enough detail, to enough channels, to ensure that by mid-afternoon the crowd outside the estate numbered in the hundreds and was growing. Ryu came back with the staff list at 12:40. Tae-jin went through it name by name, cross-referencing what he knew, which was a great deal, against what he could establish through the secure network, which was more. By 2 o'clock, he had 3 names that merited further scrutiny. By 3 o'clock, he had 1. Kim Yong-soo. Kitchen staff, 4 years with the estate, no prior incident flags. His external contact log showed a call made at 7:42 that morning, 14 minutes after the kitchen finished preparing the to-go bags for Amara, to a number that traced back to a prepaid device, location pinged at the time of the call to a block in Mapo district, Hwang's territory. Tae-jin sat with that for a moment. Then he called Ryu. "Kim Yong-soo," he said, quietly, "today." "Yes, sir." "I want to know what he was paid and by whom, and what exactly he said." He paused. "He does not leave the estate until I speak with him personally." "Understood." It was at 3:27, while Tae-jin was reviewing the morning syndicate operational reports with the focused, mechanical attention he applied to them every day, regardless of what else was happening. The discipline of routine being one of the things he credited privately with keeping him sane through the years in the chair, that the exterior alarm on approach Sector 2 went active, not the full perimeter breach alarm. The sensor that indicated movement in the dead zone between the outer wall and the secondary fence line, the strip of ground that wasn't technically inside the estate, but wasn't public either, a gray area buffer that his security architect had described as an anti-charmant zone, and which was, in theory, covered by pressure plates and motion sensors, and was definitely not somewhere a person could access from the public road without Ryu's team intercepting them. Ryu's voice on the intercom was even, which was how Tae-jin knew it was serious. "We have 2 individuals in Sector 2, moving toward the eastern utility gate. They've bypassed the road sensor, came over the ridge. Identification. Working on it. The thermal images show both armed. Professional movement. These aren't civilians." A 3-second pause. "Chairman, they're not Hwang's people. The tactical profile is different." "Who?" "I need another 2 minutes." He didn't have 2 minutes. The exterior team was already repositioning. He could see them on the monitors, moving in the practiced, economical way that Ryu trained them to move, converging on Sector 2 without running, without visible alarm, the choreography of professionals who understood that panic was a resource expenditure. The 2 figures in the thermal overlay were moving fast, low, along the eastern wall, and one of them had something in their right hand that the thermal couldn't identify, but the shape of which was not ambiguous. Then his phone rang. Not the estate line. Not the encrypted syndicate channel. His personal number saw the one that existed on fewer than 8 pieces of paper in the world. He looked at the screen. The number was one he recognized. He picked up. "Lee Sang-wook," he said. The voice on the other end was smooth, unhurried, with the particular texture of a man who had spent 30 years ensuring that nothing in his voice ever gave anything away. Lee Sang-wook, 61 years old, chairman of the Eastern Compass Alliance, the oldest and largest criminal organization operating in the Korean Peninsula, with operations extending into 5 countries and a political reach that made the Black Dragon Syndicate look like a neighborhood concern. Lee was not Tae-jin's enemy. He was not Tae-jin's ally. He was the kind of figure who existed in a category that precluded both, someone so far above the ordinary architecture of rivalries and alliances that engaging with him required recalibrating every assumption. "Tae-jin," Lee said, "I hear you have something unusual on your hands. Word travels. At my age, word is the primary currency." A pause. Not hesitation, but the deliberate rhythm of a man who speaks only when he has arranged his thoughts to his satisfaction. "I want to be direct with you. Not because I owe you directness, but because I find it more efficient. I appreciate efficiency. The child, Lee said. I want to meet her. Taejin looked at the monitors. The two figures in Sector 2 had stopped moving. Ryu's team had intercepted them. He could see the thermal cluster, 4 of his people now around the 2 intruders, and the body language even at thermal resolution was communicative. The intruders were not resisting. They were standing with their arms out, which was either surrender or an instruction. Those are your people, Taejin said, on my eastern wall. A slight pause. They were asked to deliver a letter, Lee said. I apologize for the approach. Your public access is somewhat complicated at the moment. A letter. Expressing my interest in a meeting. I prefer correspondence for initial proposals. It leaves a record that both parties can reference. Another pause. I've been told the girl heals people, Taejin. I've been told she touched you and you stood up. You understand what that represents. She's a child, Taejin said. She is, Lee agreed pleasantly. And a child in your custody is a child under your protection, which means she is also, effectively, an asset whose value accrues to you. I'm offering to discuss terms before that value becomes competitive. The word landed the way Lee intended it to. Competitive. The kind of word that described a situation before it became something that required more specific vocabulary. I'll consider the letter, Taejin said. Of course. Lee's voice was warm, which was the most dangerous thing it could be. And Taejin, the Huang vehicles on your perimeter. You've seen them. I want you to know that's not coordinated with us. Huang moves without consulting his betters. It's a characteristic flaw. A brief pause. We wouldn't be so visible. The line went dead. Taejin set the phone on the desk. He looked at the monitors. Ryu's team was escorting the 2 Eastern Compass operatives back toward the ridge, which they would cross and then be gone, and somewhere in Seoul, Lee Sang-wook was sitting in a room that no one could locate with certainty and making calculations with the unhurried precision of a man who had never once in his life needed to rush. At 4:15, the crowd outside had reached the threshold where it was no longer a crowd and had become something with its own internal pressure. Ryu's exterior team reported shoving at the edges. Someone had set up a speaker and was talking into it, amplified. The words unclear on the monitor audio, but the emotional register unmistakable. The particular rising cadence of someone addressing a group that is ready to stop waiting. At 4:49, a family near the front of the crowd, a man pushing a wheelchair with a teenage boy in it, the boy's head angled in the specific way that indicated neurological rather than orthopedic injury, rushed the gate. Not violent, not organized, just the spontaneous movement of a person who had run out of patience. 2 of Ryu's exterior guards stepped forward. The man stopped. Then 2 other people at the front of the crowd moved, and then 4 more. And then the edge of the crowd compressed forward in that stomach-dropping way that crowds do when they cross the threshold from assembly to pressure. And Ryu's exterior guards were outnumbered before anyone had made a decision about it. Ryu's voice came over the intercom flat and fast. Chairman, I need a directive. Taejin was already at the window. Hold the gate, he said. No physical contact with civilians. If it escalates... He stopped. Below the snow-cleared garden, beyond the outer wall, he could hear it now. Not individual voices, but the collective sound of several hundred people operating above their tolerance threshold, a low resonant pressure that the soundproofing was struggling to fully contain. Nobody gets hurt, he said. Nobody. You understand me? Yes, sir. He looked at the clock on the study wall. 4:51. Amara had said same time, which meant she was coming at approximately midnight, 7 hours from now. She had no idea what was waiting outside the gate. She was 6 years old, she had walked up this hill last night alone in a snowstorm with damp sneakers and a practical idea, and in the morning hours since she left. Everything had moved so fast and in so many directions that Taejin was looking at a situation that had no clean edge to it, no leverage point he could identify that would resolve cleanly. He could not let her come back tonight. That was the one clear thought. Whatever was happening, Lee Sang-wook's letter, Huang's surveillance vehicles, Kim Young-soo's phone call to Mapo, the crowd below with its rising internal pressure. He needed to get to Amara before she got to the gate. He needed her address, her mother's number, some way to reach the woman who was working 3 jobs on a Tuesday and did not know her daughter had walked up a criminal's private road in a snowstorm with a proposal. He called Ryu back. The girl, Amara Brooks. I need her home address. She would have come from this neighborhood. The hill road narrows down to 2 residential streets before it hits the public transit corridor. Cross-reference any immigrant family records in that area. Korean immigration files for American nationals, single mother household, arrived within the last 2 to 3 years. That'll take time, sir. It'll take less time than a 6-year-old appearing at the gate tonight with 800 people watching. He paused. Start now. He hung up. He turned back to the window. The garden below was white and still and entirely sealed from what was happening 20 meters beyond the outer wall, and the contrast between this stillness and the pressure he could feel building on the other side of the stone was something he felt in his chest, in the way that he had once felt it about very different situations. The night before the shooting in Gangnam, the morning he flew to Switzerland, the afternoon his wife's lawyer presented the documents with the careful professional neutrality of someone who understood that the documents were a kind of violence, but preferred not to characterize them that way. Something was about to break. He didn't know yet what it was, or which direction it would go when it did. But he had been in enough rooms with enough building pressure to know the specific quality of the air when the decision-making window was getting small. His phone buzzed, a message on the syndicate channel, relayed through 2 cutouts, the system they used for information that needed to arrive without a traceable origin. He read it once, then read it again, and the second reading did not change what it said. Hwang Sung-do had not come to the hill to watch. According to the message, sourced from their Mapo contact, Park Chun-hee, who had apparently spent the last 6 hours in a room where Hwang's people were discussing things they should not have been discussing in front of her, Hwang had already moved. Not surveillance, not reconnaissance. An extraction team, 4 people, currently positioned in the residential streets at the base of the hill, with a brief that was not ambiguous. Locate the child, secure her before she reaches the estate, and transport her to a secondary location in Yeongdeungpo before midnight. They already knew where Amara lived. Taejin read that sentence again. They already knew where Amara lived, which meant the leak, Kim Yong-soo, Mapo phone call at 7:42 this morning, had not just sold the story to a news affiliate. He had sold the address. He had given Hwang's people the one piece of information that Taejin himself did not yet have. He pressed the intercom. His voice, when he spoke, was very quiet, which was the register his staff had learned over years to treat as the most serious one. Ryu, cancel the address search. I need every available mobile unit, every driver, every car, on the residential streets at the base of the hill. Now. Tonight. All of them. He paused. The child is coming up that road in approximately 7 hours, and Hwang's extraction team is already in position. Find her first. A pause on the other end. Then, yes, sir. And Ryu. Sir. Kim Yong-soo, he said. Don't wait until I speak with him. I already know what he said. He released the intercom button. Outside, the crowd had gotten louder. Through the window, he could see his exterior guards holding the gate, both hands out, moving slowly, the practiced de-escalation posture Ryu had drilled into all of them. Holding. For now. 7 hours. Somewhere at the bottom of this hill, in a small apartment that he did not yet have an address for, Amara Brooks, 6 3/4, pink coat, damp sneakers, was either already gone or... Ryu's voice came back on the intercom 40 seconds after Jin released the button, and those 40 seconds were the kind that accumulate weight as they pass, each one pressing down slightly harder than the one before it. Sir, we have a problem. Tell me. The mobile units. 3 of the 4 vehicles we'd normally deploy are currently in maintenance. The scheduled service rotation was moved up 2 days ago, signed off by... A pause. The kind of pause that meant Ryu had already followed the thread to where it ended. By Kim Yong-soo, who handles the staff coordination log on Tuesdays. Taejin sat with that for exactly 1 second. What do we have that moves? 2 vehicles, 1 driver per, and 6 guards I can pull from interior rotation without dropping the estate below minimum coverage. Do it. Get them on the streets now, all 6 residential blocks at the base of the hill. Split them, 2 men per block on foot. I want eyes on every person moving on that road tonight. He paused. Tell them what she looks like. Pink coat, small, black girl, 6 years old. They see her, they do not approach with force. They call in, and they stay with her until I give the next directive. And Hwang's extraction team. 4 people, Taejin said. Armed. If any of my people make contact, I understand. He released the button. He moved the wheelchair to the center of the study and sat very still for a moment, which was what he did when the situation had exceeded the bandwidth of reactive decision-making and required him to stop and locate the actual shape of things. It was a discipline he had developed young and maintained through decades of situations that wanted to move faster than clarity allowed. He breathed. He looked at the wall. What he knew, Huang's people had Amara's address. They had it because Kim Yong-soo had sold it this morning along with everything else. They had positioned 4 operatives at the base of the hill before the media had even established a full presence, which meant Huang had not reacted to the news. He had anticipated it, which meant the briefing Kim gave them at 7:42 this morning had been detailed enough that Huang's operational team could plan and deploy in under 9 hours. That was not a casual tip-off. That was a comprehensive intelligence package, which meant Kim Yong-soo had not sold a story. He had sold a dossier. What he didn't know, whether Amara was still at home, whether her mother was home yet, whether a 6-year-old who had walked up a criminal's private road alone at midnight once would exercise any more caution the second time than she had the first. He already knew the answer to the last one. She wouldn't. She had said same time with the flat certainty of someone who made commitments and honored them without ongoing deliberation. She would come up the road at midnight with her pink coat and her damp sneakers, and she would knock on the gate, and everything Huang had positioned down there would be waiting. He called Ryu again. Kim Yong-soo, where is he right now? Kitchen quarters. We told him there was a staffing issue with the overnight prep, kept him on premises. Bring him to the study. The wait was 6 minutes. Taejin used them to pull up the exterior camera grid and watch the crowd, which by now, 5:20 in the evening, the sky above Seoul going the dark gray of early winter nightfall, had reached a density that his exterior team was no longer able to manage through presence alone. The gate was holding. The guards were holding. But the front edge of the crowd was close enough to the iron bars that he could see faces on the camera, individual faces, and what he saw in them was not the abstract mass emotion of a mob. It was specific. It was the face of the woman on crutches. It was the face of the man who had rushed the gate earlier with the teenager in the wheelchair, who was now standing at the front of the crowd with both hands wrapped around the bars, not pulling on them, just holding on, as though the contact was itself something. He looked away from the screen. Kim Yong-soo was 33 years old, medium height, the kind of unremarkable physical presence that made him well-suited to kitchen work and poorly suited to situations that required him to hold himself together under direct pressure. He came into the study with Ryu 2 steps behind him, and he looked at Tae-jin, and the color left his face in the gradual, thorough way that it leaves the face of someone who has been hoping all day that the thing they did this morning would not find them before nightfall. It had found him. Tae-jin looked at him for a long time without speaking. Kim stood in the center of the study with his hands at his sides and his breathing visible, chest rising and falling too fast, too shallow, the body's autonomous systems registering what the conscious mind was still trying to negotiate with. Sit down, Tae-jin said. Kim sat in the chair across the desk. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at the desk surface rather than at Tae-jin, which was the instinctive avoidance behavior of someone who understands that eye contact in this situation will not help them. The phone call at 7:42, Tae-jin said. Tell me about it. Kim's hands pressed harder on his knees. Chairman, I'm not asking for a defense, Tae-jin said. I'm asking for the content of the call. What did you say? Who did you say it to? What did they pay you? He paused. In that order, Kim looked at him then. The look of a man deciding in real time whether the thing he is most afraid of is the truth or the continued withholding of it. The calculation resolved in approximately 4 seconds. I told them about the girl, he said. I told them she came last night. I gave them the address. I got it from the delivery manifest. When we packed the food bags, the night staff logged the address for the outer gate register. The address, Tae-jin said. You gave them her home address. Yes. The word barely had sound to it. What else? I told them what she said, what she claimed she could do. I told them about Dr. Yoon's assessment. He stopped. They already knew about you, about your condition. I didn't give them that. They knew. Who is they? Kim was quiet for 1 beat too long. Kim. It wasn't Huang, Kim said. His voice was different now. Still afraid. But underneath the fear, there was something that sounded almost like relief. The terrible relief of a man who has been carrying a specific weight for a specific amount of time and has reached the point where putting it down is preferable to any of the consequences. It was Lee Sang-wook's people. They contacted me 3 weeks ago. They said they just wanted to know if anything unusual happened at the estate, anything that seemed important. They said it was routine. They paid me. He stopped. Taejin looked at him. Lee's people contacted you 3 weeks ago. Yes. And you've been reporting to them for 3 weeks. Nothing happened for 3 weeks. There was nothing to report. They called twice, and I said nothing happened. And then last night, he pressed his hands harder on his knees. Last night, something happened. Taejin sat with this. He sat with it the way he sat with things that required sitting with, flat, level, the emotion present but not permitted to move through him faster than understanding could follow it. Lee Sang-wook had called him this morning with his smooth, unhurried voice to express interest in a meeting and to warn him about Hwang's visibility. Lee had positioned himself as the measured alternative to Hwang's reckless aggression. He had framed himself as someone offering Taejin a choice. And simultaneously, Lee had known about Amara since 7:42 this morning because he had placed an asset inside Taejin's household staff 3 weeks ago, and that asset had called in the moment anything worth calling in occurred. The letter Lee's men had tried to deliver over the eastern wall wasn't a proposal. It was a demonstration, a proof of access. Look how close we already are. Look what we already know. Look how little separates where we are from wherever you need us not to be. And Hwang moving fast and visibly, Hwang's extraction team on the residential streets, Hwang without the patience to be subtle. Lee had flagged Hwang to him this morning like a man pointing at a fire so you don't notice the water rising. Who else is inside? Taejin said. Kim blinked. What? Lee placed you 3 weeks ago. How many others? I only know about myself. They didn't tell me. They don't share that kind of... Ryu, Taejin said. Ryu moved from the doorway. Kim's hands came off his knees. I want a full security audit, Taejin said. Every staff member, every access point, every external communication in the last month. Treat it as a full compromise and work backward. He looked at Kim. He stays on premises. Secure room, not the cells, the guest quarters on the north side. Make sure he's comfortable. Kim looked up at the word comfortable with an expression of someone parsing, whether that word was being used sincerely or as a specific kind of threat. Taejin did not clarify. Ryu moved Kim out of the chair and out of the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this particular choreography before, and then the study door closed and Taejin was alone. He looked at the monitor grid, the crowd at the gate, the empty garden, the dark streets beyond the wall where his 6 available people were deploying in pairs into the residential blocks at the base of the hill. Lee Sang-wook had moved first. Not Hwang. Lee had been in position for 3 weeks, which meant Lee's interest in Amara was not something that had developed this morning. It predated her arrival by 3 weeks, which was impossible unless Lee had information about her that Taejin did not. No one had known she was coming. She had walked up to the gate alone in a snowstorm on her own initiative. No one could have predicted that, unless someone had known she existed before she knocked. He turned that thought over carefully. Her grandmother, she had said. Her grandmother had told her about a man in the hills who couldn't walk. Her grandmother had been from this neighborhood a long time ago. Her grandmother had known things. Amar had said the knowing came to her sometimes. Had said it with the matter-of-fact quality of a child reporting a fact about a family member rather than making a claim about the extraordinary. Lee was 61. He had built his organization over 30 years. He had roots in the northern hills of Seoul that predated anyone currently operating in this city's criminal landscape. The idea that Lee Sang-wook might have known an old woman from Bugaksan was not in itself impossible. The idea that Lee might have known what that woman knew, or might have been watching all along for what she had told him was coming. His phone rang. The syndicate channel. He picked up. This is Choi, his operations lieutenant, currently running the mobile units on the streets below. Choi Min-soo, 12 years with the organization, the best field coordinator Taejin had. Sir, we've made visual contact. The girl, she's on the road. She left her apartment building approximately 9 minutes ago. She's alone. Taejin's hand tightened on the phone. Which block? She's already past the third residential crossing. She's moving fast for a brief pause. She's moving fast. Sir, Huang's team. We've identified two of them. They're moving parallel on the adjacent street. They haven't made contact yet, but they're pacing her, waiting for a gap in foot traffic. Get to her first. A burst of static. Sir, there's a complication. The crowd from the estate has pushed back down the hill. The lower section of the lane is now blocked by civilians. People who heard the story and started moving toward the hill from the transit corridor. My people are blocked. We cannot get a vehicle through. Taejin looked at the monitor. The crowd. He could see it on the exterior cameras. The front of it still pressing at the gate, but the outer edges spreading. People moving along the perimeter wall in both directions. Some of them beginning to flow down the lane toward the residential streets where the actual hill road began. The crowd was no longer static. It was moving, and it was moving in exactly the direction that complicated everything. On foot, he said. Tell them on foot, now. Yes, sir. Wait. A pause. Sir, we have a problem. The tone of that particular phrase, the specific quality of Choi's voice around those 4 words, the flatness of it, was something Taejin recognized from 15 years of operations. It was the tone of someone reporting something they hoped they had misidentified and had not. Huang's team isn't 4, Choi said. We're counting 8. There was a secondary deployment we didn't see earlier. They must have staged in the transit corridor and moved up when the crowd started shifting. 8 people, sir. My 2 men on foot. They can't intercept 8 Huang operatives and protect the girl simultaneously. Taejin looked at the exterior camera grid, the gate, the garden, the wall, the lane beyond. He looked at his legs. He pressed the intercom for the medical room. Yoon. She appeared in the study doorway in under 30 seconds, still carrying her tablet, still in her coat from earlier in the day, because she had not left and had not planned to leave. She looked at his face and stopped asking the question she had been about to ask. Can I walk? He said. Right now. Tonight. How far? She looked at him. The professional calculation was visible in her face. The assessment happening behind her eyes, pulling data, running it against what she had seen in the morning's tests, against the degradation rate of the afternoon readings, against everything she knew and everything she was still trying to categorize. You stood for 4 minutes this morning, she said, with support. Your muscle atrophy after 20 years. The neurological recovery is faster than the muscular. Your legs will respond, but they will not hold reliably. You could fall. If you fall wrong, you could... Yoon? Yes, she said. You can walk. Some distance, with support. But Taejin... He was already moving the wheelchair toward the door. Get Ryu, he said, and bring whatever you have for pain. Bring all of it. The next 11 minutes had a quality that he would not be able to fully reconstruct later. Not because they were chaotic, but because they moved in the way that things move when the body is doing something it has not done in 20 years, and the mind is simultaneously trying to coordinate that physical fact with an operational emergency, and there is simply not enough bandwidth for both to be fully experienced in real time. Ryu appeared. Doctor, Yoon administered 2 injections. She told him what they were, and he did not retain the names. He stood in the main corridor of the estate with both hands on Ryu's arm and his teeth set against the specific and comprehensive agony of muscles that had been dormant for 2 decades being asked, right now, immediately, to function. They functioned, badly, shaking, his left leg more responsive than his right, the right dragging slightly, the nerve conduction uneven, the whole enterprise of moving forward requiring a level of deliberate physical attention that he had not applied to walking since he was a toddler. But he moved. Down the corridor, through the main entrance hall, out through the ground floor security door that Ryu coded open and held for him. The cold hit him in the face like a specific and personal insult. The lane, he said. His breath was already visible in the night air. Ryu had his arm. 2 additional guards flanked them, close, the way they moved around something valuable and fragile, and Taejin hated it and accepted it simultaneously because the alternative was the ground. She's on the lane. How far? Ryu's radio crackled, Choi's voice in pieces. Contact. Huang's people moving. She's running. Taejin heard that last word, running, and felt something happen in his chest that was not a medical event but operated on similar pathways. She was running. 6 years old, pink coat, running in the dark on a lane she had only walked once before, in a snowstorm, with 8 of Huang's extraction team converging from the adjacent street and the crowd blocking any vehicle that could help her. He went through the outer gate while Ryu was still talking to him. He felt the cold of the flagstone through his shoes, felt it, actually felt the temperature differential between the heated interior and the January night. And he moved forward into the lane with his hand on Ryu's arm and his jaw set, and the pain doing what pain does when there is no option left but to keep moving through it, which is that it recedes to a frequency below conscious thought and becomes simply the condition of existence. The lane sloped down. That was in his favor. Gravity assisted. He moved faster than he should have, and Ryu kept pace without comment. And behind them, the 2 flanking guards moved in close formation. And ahead of them, the lane curved left, where it bent around the outer wall's eastern corner and opened up to the wider residential road below. He heard her before he saw her. Not words. A sound. Small, high. The involuntary vocalization of a small person in sudden fear, immediately suppressed. The suppression itself communicating more than the sound had, because it told him that whoever was frightening her was close enough that she was trying not to let them know how afraid she was. He came around the corner of the wall. The lane opened up below him, and in the amber wash of the single working street lamp, he saw Amara Brooks standing very still in the center of the road with her pink coat and her hands at her sides and her chin up. And 3 meters in front of her stood a man in a dark jacket who was holding something in his right hand that caught the light briefly before the man registered the group of people coming around the wall above him and shifted his body to reorient toward the new threat. Behind Amara, 2 more figures were moving in from the side road, the adjacent street where Huang's secondary deployment had staged. Choi's people were somewhere further down the lane, blocked by the crowd, their voices audible on the radio but their bodies not yet visible. The crowd itself was there too. Its outer edges had flowed down this far. Individual people standing at the margins of the scene with the particular frozen quality of bystanders who have stumbled into something that is no longer their category of situation and have not yet decided whether to run. The man with the object in his hand looked at Tae-jin. Tae-jin looked back at him. He was standing in the lane on his own legs, gripping Ryu's arm, breathing hard in the cold, 20 years of atrophy burning through every muscle below his waist, and between him and the girl. There were 3 of Huang's people, and behind the girl there were 2 more, and the crowd was watching, and somewhere behind the crowd there were cameras. And in a room somewhere in this city, Lee Sang-wook was waiting for the outcome. With the patience of a man who had arranged things so that any outcome served him, Tae-jin released Ryu's arm. He took 1 step, then another. Without the support, his right leg dragged, barely clearing the ground, and his left leg shook with the effort of bearing full weight alone for the half-second intervals that walking required. And it was quite possibly the most undignified physical motion he had performed since learning to walk the first time, and he did not stop. "That's my ward," he said. His voice came out level. "You're in the way." The man in the dark jacket looked at the guards behind Tae-jin, looked at the wheelchair that was not there, that had been left inside the estate, because there had been no way to get it down the lane steps. Looked at the man walking toward him on legs that were clearly not working the way legs were supposed to work, moving anyway, covering the distance between them with the grim arithmetic of someone who has decided that the distance will be covered regardless of what the body says about it. The man stepped back. Not far. Enough. Tae-jin reached Amara. He got both hands on her shoulders, not grabbing, just placing. The weight of his hands on her small shoulders, requiring him to bend forward, which altered his center of gravity, which nearly took him down. And he steadied himself with the specific violence of a man who has decided he is not going to fall in front of 8 of Hwang Sung-do's operatives and 200 civilians and whatever cameras were running on those journalists' equipment. Amara looked up at him. Her eyes in the lamplight were completely dry. She had not cried. "I was wondering when you were going to come," she said. He looked down at her. Behind her, the 2 figures from the side street had stopped. Ryu and the 4 guards had fanned out to cover the lane in both directions. On his radio, Choi's voice was reporting that the crowd had parted enough for a vehicle to push through in the next 2 minutes. Above them, at the top of the lane, the estate's gate lights came on. The full array. The kind of illumination that flooded the entire hill face and made every person and vehicle on the lane visible to anything with a lens pointed this way, which meant every camera in that media cluster at the base of the hill was currently capturing this image. Kang Tae-jin, the Black Dragon chairman who had been in a wheelchair for 20 years, standing in a lane in the hills above Seoul, with both hands on the shoulders of a 6-year-old girl in a pink coat, while 5 of Hwang Sung-do's operatives stood in a semicircle around them, calculating a decision that the floodlights had just made significantly more expensive. The man in the dark jacket looked at the lights, looked at the cameras, looked at Tae-jin. He put the object, a phone, Tae-jin registered now, not a weapon. It had been a phone the whole time, recording, in his jacket pocket. He turned. He walked back toward the side street. The other 4 followed, not quickly, not with any visible urgency, with the controlled retreat of professionals who have decided that this particular version of the operation is over, while leaving open the question of whether the operation itself is over. Tae-jin watched them go. His legs were shaking so badly now that he was not certain how many more seconds he had before they made the decision for him, and he tightened his grip on Amar's shoulders, which gave him just enough additional leverage to remain upright, and he breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth, and waited. The vehicle Choi had pushed through the crowd came up the lane. Ryu opened the door. Tae-jin looked at it. The low chassis, the step required to enter, the physics of getting into a vehicle on legs that were done. And he looked at Ryu. And Ryu looked back at him with the face of a man who understood both the situation and the pride involved, and had already calculated the most efficient way to resolve the gap between them. "Sir," Ryu said. Just the one word. Tae-jin let go of Amara's shoulders. He let Ryu take his arm. He got in the vehicle. It cost him more than the walk had, in a different way, the way that accepting help always costs more than the physical action it enables. And he did not make a sound about it. Amara got in beside him. She sat with her hands in her lap and her feet not touching the floor, and she looked out the window as the vehicle turned and started up the lane toward the estate, and the crowd at the margins of the lane parted around them, and the camera lights found the vehicle and tracked it, and the faces of the people watching from the edges of the road went past the window one by one. "Those men wanted to take you," Tae-jin said. "I know," she said. She was still looking out the window. "They'd been following me since I left my building." She paused. "I kept walking anyway. My grandma said the only way through a scary thing is through it." He looked at the side of her face. "Your grandmother said a great deal of useful things." "She did," Amara agreed. Then she turned to look at him, and her expression had shifted slightly. Still direct, still that unreadable level gaze, but underneath it now something that was either fatigue or its emotional equivalent. "Are you okay?" she said. "Your legs. You were shaking." "I'm fine," he said. She looked at him with the specific patience of a person who has been told something that is not entirely accurate and has decided not to argue about it at this particular moment. "Okay," she said. Then, "I should call my mom. She's going to be worried." "Yes," he said. "You should." She took a phone, small, old model, a crack across the screen, from her coat pocket and dialed. The car moved up the lane. Outside, the estate's floodlights still ran at full, and below them the crowd shifted and murmured and the cameras recorded what they recorded, and somewhere in the city Lee Sang-wook was receiving a report about what had just happened in the lane. And somewhere in Yeongdongpo, Hwang Sung-do was receiving a different report, and Tae-jin sat in the back of the vehicle with his useless shaking legs and listened to a 6-year-old girl tell her mother in careful, even English that she was fine, that she was safe, that she was with someone who was going to make sure she got home. And he looked out the window at the Seoul night and understood, with the particular clarity that comes to men who have just done something they did not believe their body could do, that tomorrow was going to be worse than today, and that the only meaningful question left was whether he was going to face it on his feet, or sitting down. He chose neither, for the moment. He sat in the back of the moving vehicle with that unfinished thought, and let it stay unfinished, because some sentences are more useful incomplete, held in the space between decision and action, where the pressure of them can do their work. Amara finished her call. Put the cracked phone back in her coat pocket. She didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive up the lane, and he didn't ask her to. The vehicle moved through the gate and Ryu closed it behind them, and the estate swallowed them both into its sealed, heated quiet. And outside the wall, the crowd kept its pressure, and the cameras kept their vigil, and the night continued doing what the night does, which is not wait for anyone. Dr. Yoon was at the door. She looked at Tae-jin getting out of the vehicle, looked at the specific quality of his movement, the drag of the right leg, the white grip on Ryu's arm, and she did not say anything about it. She looked at Amara instead, and her expression shifted into something that was still professional, but warmer than professional. "You must be Amara," she said. "Yes," Amara said. She looked at Yoon with the same level attention she gave everything. "Are you a doctor?" "I am. My mom is going to come here," Amara said. She was upset on the phone. "She's going to want to see where I am." She said it as a statement of logistics rather than an apology or a request. She was reporting the incoming situation so that the relevant people could prepare. "We'll get her here safely," Yoon said. She looked at Ryu, who was already on the radio. Inside, Tae-jin went directly to the study and sat and put both hands flat on his thighs and stayed there for a moment with his eyes closed, running an inventory. The pain had settled into a deep, comprehensive burn from his hips to his ankles. Not sharp, not localized, but everywhere. The kind of pain that indicates systemic effort rather than specific injury. He could still feel the floor through his shoes. That had not gone away. But the sensation was dimmer than it had been in the dining room last night. Dimmer than it had been during Yoon's morning assessment, and he did not know if that was because the physical exertion of the lane had disrupted something or because whatever Amara's presence did to his nervous system required proximity to maintain itself. He opened his eyes, looked at the monitors. The crowd had not diminished. If anything, the lane incident, the floodlights, the cameras, Tae-jin walking down the lane, whatever the media crews had captured, had added to it. He could see the count on the exterior system. Ryu's team had started a head count tracker at 4 p.m., and the current number read 640. That was 200 more than an hour ago. The lane was no longer passable by vehicle from the lower end except through the specific corridor that Choi had forced for the rescue car, and that corridor had already closed behind them. Hwang's 8 operatives had withdrawn from the lane. They had not left the area. The perimeter sensors were still picking up heat signatures in 3 locations on the exterior: stationary, patient, not moving closer, but not leaving. Hwang was recalculating. He had lost the initiative when Tae-jin came down the lane and when the floodlights came up and when the cameras captured the withdrawal. But losing the initiative was not the same as abandoning the objective. And Hwang Sung-do had not built his organization by abandoning objectives. And Lee Sang-wook had still not moved. That was the piece Tae-jin kept returning to. Lee's people had attempted the letter delivery that morning. Lee had called personally, had been smooth and directional, had positioned himself as the rational option. Since then, silence. No second contact. No visible presence. The Eastern Compass Alliance had resources that made Hwang's 8-man extraction team look like a neighborhood dispute. And those resources had not appeared anywhere on Tae-jin's perimeter grid, which meant either Lee was waiting for something specific to happen before moving, or Lee was already inside the situation in a way that Tae-jin hadn't yet identified. 3 weeks of embedded access through Kim Yong-soo. Security audit initiated but not yet complete. How many other Kims were in the house? He picked up the encrypted phone and called Choi. When Amara's mother arrives, who's escorting her up the lane? Song Jae-won, Choi said. On foot through the crowd. I've got 2 people running parallel on the perimeter walk. Keep the route varied. Don't use the same path you used for the vehicle. He paused. And Choi, when they clear the outer gate, do a full sweep before they come through, both of them. I want to know if anyone's attached anything to either of them without their knowledge. A short pause on Choi's end that contained, briefly, the shape of a question before it resolved into, understood. He hung up, sat. The pain in his legs was doing what chronic comprehensive pain does eventually, which has become background. Still present, still consuming resources, but below the threshold of conscious attention in a way that freed the foreground for other things. He thought about Lee Sang-wook's voice on the phone this morning. The warmth of it. The specific warmth of a man who is comfortable because he knows things you don't know he knows. Tae-jin had heard that tone from many people across many years, and he had always trusted his read of it because his read of it had always eventually proven correct. Lee had known about Amara before she knocked on the gate. The only way that was possible was if Lee had known about her grandmother. And the only way that meant anything was if whatever the grandmother had told the girl, the man in the hills, the healing, the timing of when she might come, was something Lee had also been told. By the grandmother herself, or by someone who had access to what the grandmother knew. An old woman from this neighborhood, Amara had said, a long time ago. And Lee had operated in these hills for 30 years. He was still building the architecture of that thought when the perimeter alarm went active on Sector 4, the north side. The blind spot between the two exterior cameras that his security architect had flagged 18 months ago as a vulnerability requiring additional coverage, and which Tae-jin had signed off on remedying, and which had not yet been remedied because the contractor doing the estate's network upgrade had run 3 months over schedule and nobody had made it a priority. He was on the intercom before Ryu's voice came through. Sector 4. I see it, Ryu said. Movement. More than 2. The thermal is showing. A tight pause. 6. 6 individuals. They came over the North Ridge, same approach as Lee's people this morning, but from a different vector. They're not Eastern Compass. The tactical profile is different. Huang. Yes, sir, and they're moving fast. This isn't reconnaissance. Tae-jin looked at the Sector 4 camera, which showed the North Garden Wall and above it the dark ridge and nothing else because the cameras in that zone were not thermal. He looked at the time. 9:43 p.m. Amara's mother, name unknown to him still, the staff had called her Ms. Brooks. Amara's mother, the woman who worked 3 jobs on Tuesday, was currently being escorted up the lane through 600 people by Song Jae-won and 2 parallel guards. Get Amar to the interior safe room, he said. Now, Yoon goes with her. Yes, sir. And pull everyone from the outer gate except 2. I need bodies on the North Garden Wall in the next 4 minutes. Everything we have inside. That leaves the gate at minimum. I know. He looked at the monitor, at the crowd pressing the gate, at the 6 heat signatures moving in from the North Ridge with the fast, low movement of people who are not here to negotiate. Huang made his calculation, he said. The crowd on the south side keeps our exterior team pinned at the gate. He goes over the North Ridge where the camera coverage is thin, and our interior response has nowhere to come from except the gate detail. He looked at the Sector 4 feed. He's right. It's a good plan. Ryu said nothing for a beat. We can repel 6 with 4 interior guards if we reach the wall before they clear it. Go, Tae-jin said, and get Choi on the phone. I need him to push through the crowd from the south lane regardless of the obstruction. Any vehicle, any speed, any damage to the gate structure that's necessary. I need bodies inside this estate in the next 6 minutes. He released the intercom. The study monitors showed him everything and nothing useful simultaneously. He could watch the sectors, but the Sector 4 camera showed him a wall and darkness above it, and not the 6 people coming over the ridge because the thermal array that would have shown him that was 11 meters to the left of its proper mounting position because the contractor had run 3 months over schedule. He stood up from the desk. It was not a fluid motion. It required both hands on the desk surface, both arms taking the weight while the legs found themselves. The right one dragging into position with the grinding uncooperativeness of something that had given a great deal already tonight and was not enthusiastic about being asked for more. He got upright. He stood. He breathed. The corridor outside the study led to the main hall, and from the main hall a secondary corridor ran north to the interior courtyard that abutted the North Garden Wall. If he was going to be anywhere near what was happening in the next 4 minutes, the north corridor was the direction. He could not fight. He understood this with the clear-eyed practicality of a man who has always known the difference between what he could and could not do. His legs were functioning at perhaps 30% of their pre-injury capacity, and the pain was significant, and he had no weapon, and these were Huang's professionals, not the kind of people who paused to reassess when they saw someone standing in a corridor on shaking legs. But he also could not sit in the study and watch the monitors while his estate was breached, and Huang's people moved through his house toward a room where a 6-year-old girl was sitting with a doctor waiting for her mother. He moved into the corridor. The north wing was quieter than the rest of the house. It was the residential section, the rooms that functioned as staff quarters and storage, less trafficked than the main sections, the kind of architectural space that a security plan leaves slightly under-resourced because the primary threat vectors are the obvious ones. The corridor was long, lit by the recessed lighting that stayed at half power overnight, and at the far end of it Tae-jin could hear, faintly, the sound of the exterior wall, the specific resonance of stone under physical impact. They were already at the wall. He moved faster. His right leg was not going to cooperate with faster. It dragged more severely at speed, the compromise between urgency and what the neurology could manage resolving in favor of a lurching, uneven gait that was not dignified and not quiet on the stone floor, but was covering ground. And the ground was getting covered, and at the end of the corridor, the door to the interior courtyard was ahead of him. He heard Ryu first. His voice, Sharp, giving commands in the specific clipped register of someone managing a physical confrontation in real time. Then something that was not a voice. Impact, hard, the sound of a body meeting a surface with more force than the surface was designed to absorb. Then the tactical radio on the wall mount crackled and went silent, which meant either the radio was broken or the person carrying it was no longer carrying it in the upright, conscious way. Taejin pushed the courtyard door. The courtyard was a walled space, open to the sky, used in other seasons for whatever a courtyard in a sealed criminal estate gets used for, which is not much. Some of the kitchen staff ate lunch here in summer. Right now it was dark, lit only by the overspill from the corridor and from the motion-activated floods on the north wall, which had activated and were throwing hard white light across the space. Two of Taejin's interior guards were in the courtyard. One was upright, engaged with a figure in dark clothing in the controlled, close-range way of trained men who are evenly matched and know it. The other guard was on the ground, not moving, positioned against the base of the interior wall with the specific stillness of someone who has been removed from the situation. Above the north wall, two more figures were in the process of coming over. Hands on the top, legs swinging, the practiced wall clear of people who have done it before. Ryu was not visible. Taejin looked at all of this in approximately 2 seconds, the assessment running on the faster parallel track that operates below conscious thought in people who have spent enough years in situations that require rapid assessment. Two over the wall, one engaged with his guard, one guard down, Ryu's location unknown, and the two coming over the wall were going to be in the courtyard in the next 8 seconds. He saw the radio on the ground, 3 meters away, near the wall. Ryu's radio. He could see the distinctive handle, the black dragon frequency marker on the side. He moved toward it across the courtyard, and the 3 seconds that took were the most exposed 3 seconds of the entire evening because he was in the open, lit by the floods. Moving wrong, the drag of his right leg visible and severe, and the figure in dark clothing who was engaged with his guard looked at him across the courtyard and made the instant calculation that a man moving that way was not a threat. That calculation was not entirely wrong. It was wrong enough. Taejin reached the radio. He got down, not gracefully, not controlled, a controlled collapse to one knee, and picked it up and keyed the broadcast channel. Choi, North Courtyard. Now. How long? Static. Then Choi's voice, compressed with effort. Pushing through the gate, 90 seconds. The crowd, 90 seconds. He looked up from the radio. The two figures had cleared the wall and were in the courtyard now. 4 of Huang's people total in the space, with his one upright guard managing one of them and the other 3 unengaged. They looked at him. At the radio in his hand, at his legs. The one closest to him took a step forward. Then the courtyard door, the door from the main corridor, not the north wing door he'd come through, opened and Amara was there. Not Dr. Yoon, not a guard. Amara Brooks, pink coat, cracked phone in her hand, standing in the doorway of the courtyard with the absolute stillness of a child who has walked into a situation she did not expect and is processing it with the same focused, unhurried attention she brought to everything. Every person in the courtyard looked at her. In the half-second of collective reorientation that followed, Taejin saw Ryu. He was behind the group near the east wall. He had been there the whole time, flat against the stone, blood on the side of his face from somewhere above his left eye, moving now toward the nearest of Huang's people with the contained economical movement of a very large man who has been waiting for the moment when the opposition's attention is divided. Taejin looked at Amara. "Go back inside," he said. His voice came out completely level, which cost him something. "My mom is at the gate," she said. "I heard her on the radio. She's at the outer gate, and nobody's letting her in." One of Huang's men moved toward her. Not fast, calculated, the deliberate movement of someone intending to use her as leverage rather than cause her harm, which made it worse rather than better. Because leverage was the objective, she was the objective. The entire evening's operation collapsed down to this moment, in this courtyard, with this child standing in a doorway. Taejin pushed himself upright from the one-knee position. It took everything he had in both arms and whatever his legs were still capable of contributing, and what they contributed was marginal, but it was enough, and he was standing, and he was between Amara and the man moving toward her before the man had covered half the distance. He was not able to stop the man physically. He knew this. He stood anyway because the calculation was not about whether he could stop the man physically, The calculation was about whether he was willing to not stand between a 6-year-old and the thing moving toward her, and that calculation had already resolved itself. Ryu hit the man from the left side with the force of someone who has been storing the energy of the entire evening for exactly this expenditure, and the impact drove both of them into the courtyard's east wall, and Ryu's follow-through was fast and thorough, and when it was done, the man was on the ground and Ryu was upright, breathing hard, blood streaming freely from the cut above his eye in the way head wounds bleed copiously and without particular concern for the inconvenience. The remaining 3 of Huang's people reassessed. They reassessed because Choi's vehicle had just come through the estate's north service entrance, the smaller gate, the one that required a code and that Choi had apparently acquired the code for and had used it. And the vehicle's headlights were flooding the north side of the courtyard, and Choi was out of it before it stopped moving. And behind Choi there were 3 more of the estate's guards, and the ratio of the courtyard had just shifted in a way that was not favorable to continued engagement. 2 of the 3 retreated. Back to the wall, over it, the practiced reversal of the entry, gone into the dark above the ridge. The third stood for a moment in the courtyard with the headlights on him, and then made the same decision and moved to the wall and was gone. The courtyard was quiet. Choi moved to Ryu. Ryu waved him off with one hand. Not injured beyond the head wound, the wave said, "Leave it," and turned to look at Tae-jin. Tae-jin was still standing. He was standing because he had not yet made the decision to stop, and his body had not yet made the decision for him. And for this moment, this particular and very specific moment, in the north courtyard of his estate with blood on the flagstones and Ryu's head wound, and Amara behind him in the doorway, these conditions still obtained. "She's at the outer gate," he said. His voice was steady. "Amara's mother. Let her in." "Yes, sir," Choi said. "And get the south gate locked down completely. Nothing moves in or out without my direct authorization. No exceptions." He paused. "And get someone who can close that hole in the north wall coverage. I don't care about the contractor's schedule. Tonight." He turned to Amara. She was looking at Ryu's head wound with the calm, focused concern of someone who has noted a problem and is determining what the appropriate response is. She looked up at Tae-jin. "Is he going to be okay?" she said. "Yes," Tae-jin said. She looked at the man on the ground, conscious, not moving, Choi already crouching beside him with the controlled efficiency of someone securing a situation. She looked back at Tae-jin. "What happens to him?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the man on the ground, at Choi, who was watching Tae-jin with the patient attentiveness of someone waiting for an instruction. "Secure him," Tae-jin said. "No harm. I want to talk to him when this is done." He looked back at Amara. "We deal with people, not the other way." She held his gaze for a moment, then she nodded, a small, grave nod, the kind that indicates genuine consideration rather than automatic agreement. His legs chose that moment to finish their input on the evening. The right one simply stopped, the nerve signal dropping below the threshold of function without warning, and the left one was not sufficient to hold him alone, and he went down. Not completely, not the full ground contact fall, because Ryu was there and Ryu had him by the arm before the descent became complete, and it resolved as a controlled kneel rather than a collapse. But there was nothing graceful about it, and there was no version of it that didn't happen in front of everyone in the courtyard. He was on one knee on the flagstone. His right hand was on the ground. The cold of the stone came through his palm, and he felt it, felt the cold, felt the texture, felt the grit of the stone surface. And that sensation, persisting through the failure of everything else, was simultaneously the most insufficient and the most extraordinary thing happening to him right now. Amara crouched down in front of him. She was at eye level with him now, which had never happened before. She looked at him with those direct, unshifting eyes, and she put both her small hands on his knees, right there in the courtyard, without being asked, without preamble or announcement. The heat came back. It came back faster than the first time. Not building, but arriving. The door already open the way she had said it would be. The pathways already mapped. The signal traveling the route it had learned last night, and covering the distance at a speed that his nervous system apparently now recognized. He felt his right leg. Fully. Both legs, from hip to foot, the heat and pressure and specific sensation of a body that was damaged and exhausted and being asked for more than it had available. He put his hand on his flagstone and pushed. He got his left leg under him, then his right. He stood with Ryu's arm and with Amara's hands on his knees and with the combined residual will of a man who has just run out of every other resource and found that will, when reduced to its pure form, does not require a body that cooperates. It simply requires a direction. He was standing. Amara stood with him, her hands staying on his knees as long as the geometry of their different heights allowed, and then she stepped back and looked up at him, and her expression had something in it now that was new. Not quite satisfaction, not quite relief, something that existed between them that didn't have a clean word. From beyond the estate wall, from the south side where the crowd still held and the cameras still ran and the lane still churned with 600 people who had come to this hill because they had heard something, came a sound that was different from the crowd sound of the last several hours. Not pressure, not the collective murmur of people waiting, something that built from the bottom of the crowd upward, rolling, getting larger. Someone in the crowd had seen the feeds. The interior courtyard's flood activation had tripped a camera that broadcast to the estate's exterior display system. The screen mounted above the main gate that was normally used for security announcements and that was currently running a live feed of the north courtyard because nobody had switched it off. The crowd had just watched Kang Tai-jin stand up. The sound coming over the wall now was not anger, not pressure, not the dangerous resonance of a mob approaching threshold. It was something rawer than that and harder to characterize. And Tai-jin stood in his north courtyard with blood on the flagstones and Ryu's wound and Choi's guards at the wall, and Amara beside him, and he listened to it rise. Then the outer gate intercom crackled and Choi's voice came through it with the particular flatness of a man delivering information that does not yet have a category. Chairman, the woman at the gate. A pause. She says her name is Nadia Brooks. She says she's Amara's mother. She also says, another pause, longer. She says she has a letter for you. She says an old man gave it to her in the crowd. She says the old man told her to make sure you read it tonight, before you make any decisions about tomorrow. Tai-jin looked at the intercom, then at Amara. Amara was looking at the intercom too. Her expression had shifted in a way he had not seen before. A slight tightening around the eyes, something between recognition and the feeling that comes when a thing you have been waiting for, without fully knowing you were waiting, has finally arrived. What is it? Tai-jin said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said very carefully, my grandma wrote letters before she died. She said some of them would find the right people when the time came. She paused. She said the old people in this neighborhood remembered everything, and that one of them would make sure the letters got where they needed to go. He looked at her for a long time in the floodlit courtyard, with the crowd sound rolling over the wall, and Ryu's blood on the flagstone, and his own legs shaking underneath him, and Seoul spread out below the hill doing what Seoul always did, which was continue regardless. Let her in, he said into the intercom. Both of them. Bring the letter. The outer gate opened. Nadia Brooks came through it with Song Jae-won at her left shoulder and 2 guards flanking, and she walked the way a woman walks when she has been pushing through 600 people for 20 minutes and has arrived somewhere she does not recognize and is operating entirely on the specific fuel of maternal urgency, which does not require orientation or context and does not wait for either. She was 31 or 32, taller than her daughter by the distance that 9 years produces, with the same direct eyes and the same quality of attention and the composure of someone who has learned to hold herself together under pressure because the alternative was not available to her. She saw Amara. She crossed the courtyard in 4 steps and she had her daughter in both arms before anyone said anything, and Amara let herself be held with the small, complete relief of a child who has been managing alone and is now done managing. Nadia looked at Tai-jin over her daughter's head, at the courtyard, at the guards, at Ryu's wound and the man secured against the east wall and the state of the flagstone. Her expression moved through several things in rapid sequence: assessment, controlled fear, a hard anger that she was holding at distance with visible effort. And then it settled into something that was not warmth exactly, but was the decision to proceed without hostility until hostility became necessary. She told me she had a plan, Nadia said. Her English was American flat, Chicago or near it, the accent of somewhere specific that had been partially worn away by years somewhere else. She didn't tell me the plan involved this. She didn't tell me either, Tai-jin said. Most of it. Nadia looked at him, at his legs, at the way he was standing, the specific quality of it, the effort visible in the set of his shoulders and the grip of his hands, and the slight forward lean that a person uses when their lower body is not fully reliable and they are distributing weight through their core to compensate. She had the look of someone reassembling information into a new order. "You can walk," she said. "Partially," he said. "Tonight more than this morning. Tomorrow, I don't know." She looked at Amara. "Baby, did you—" "Yes," Amara said, into her mother's shoulder. "I told him I could help. He fed us." Nadia closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she opened them and looked at Taejin again. "The letter," she said. "The old man in the crowd. I didn't know him. He was just there at the edge of the crowd when I was trying to get through, and he put it in my hand and said, 'Make sure the chairman reads it before morning.'" She reached into her coat pocket and produced an envelope. Not new, the paper slightly soft with age, sealed with tape rather than glue, addressed in Korean characters and handwriting that had the careful deliberateness of someone writing in a language that was not first but was known. She held it out to him. He took it. He looked at the handwriting. He looked at the return address in the upper corner. Not an address, a name. 3 characters in Korean, small, written with the same deliberate hand. He stared at those 3 characters for long enough that Ryu, beside him, shifted slightly. He knew that name, not from his own history, from a history that predated him, that existed in the syndicate's oldest records, in the founding documents that Park Chul-ho had kept, and that Tae-jin had inherited along with everything else when he was 23 and the shoes were still on. A name from the neighborhood, from the years before the estate was an estate, when this hill was just a hill and the Black Dragon was still deciding what it was going to be. He opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten on both sides in the same careful Korean, and he read it standing in the courtyard with Ryu at his shoulder and Nadia holding Amara across the flagstones, and the crowd beyond the wall making its sound that was not anger and not grief, but something in between that had its own specific frequency. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket and stood for a moment with one hand pressed flat against his chest where the letter was, which was not a gesture he had intended and was not one he would have made if he had been thinking about what his hands were doing. Ryu said nothing. Ryu had read it over his shoulder because Ryu was Ryu, and because after 11 years, Tae-jin had stopped pretending that Ryu's situational awareness had boundaries. He simply read it and stood beside his employer in silence and waited. "The conference room," Tae-jin said. "Tonight, 1 hour. I want Choi. I want the operational leads. I want legal." He paused. "And get Lee Sang-wook on the phone. Tell him I'll meet him tomorrow. In person. His location, my choice of time." He looked at Ryu. "Tell him I've read the letter." Ryu looked at him. "And Hwang. Hwang can wait until I'm done with Lee," he said. "Hwang is a problem. Lee is a question." He turned to Nadia. "You and Amara will stay here tonight," he said. "It's not a request. The crowd outside won't clear before morning, and Hwang's people are still on the perimeter. Your apartment is not safe until I've addressed both of those things." He paused. "You'll have full use of the north guest rooms. The staff will bring whatever you need. In the morning, when the situation is resolved, I will personally ensure your transportation home." Nadia looked at him for a long moment. She was calculating, which was fair. He was a man she did not know, in a place she did not know, who had just given her a directive in his own home about where she was permitted to go. And the fact that the directive came with genuine safety reasoning rather than genuine threat did not mean the power dynamic it operated within was anything other than what it was. "Are we guests?" she said. "Or are we here because it's safer for you if we are?" He met her gaze. "Both," he said. "You should know which one it is." She looked at him for another beat. Then she looked down at Amara. "Okay," she said. Not warmly, but cleanly, without the kind of residual resistance that would have made it something other than a decision. He nodded. "Ryu will take you up." Inside, in the medical room, Dr. Yoon closed the cut above Ryu's left eye with the focused efficiency of a woman who had done this many times before and had long since made her peace with the frequency. Ryu sat still on the edge of the examination table and stared at the middle distance while she worked, which was how Ryu experienced most things, as background phenomena that did not require his participation beyond physical presence. "The readings held through all of it," Yoon said. Not to Ryu. To Tae-jin, who was in the chair by the window because he had finally, without ceremony, sat down, which his body had been requesting for the past hour. Even after the exertion in the courtyard, even after the fall, the L3 through L5 conduction is still active. She pressed a closure strip over the wound and stepped back to assess. I don't understand why the physical trauma didn't interrupt it. The girl touched him again, Ryu said. In the courtyard, after he went down. Yoon looked at Taijin. Yes, he said. She was quiet for a moment, then, the letter. You don't have to tell me what's in it. No, he said, but I'm going to. He took it from his jacket and held it for a moment, feeling the slight weight of the folded pages. Then he told her what it said, not reading it aloud, translating it, which is different, which requires the additional step of choosing words, which means the content passes through you before it reaches anyone else. The woman who had written the letter was named Han Geum-ja. She had lived on this hill for 40 years, in the neighborhood below the estate, before the estate was the estate. She had known Park Chul-ho. She had known, peripherally, a young man named Kang Tae-jin in the years before the shooting, the way people in a neighborhood know each other through proximity and repetition rather than intention. She had known what the Black Dragon was and what it did, and had coexisted with that knowledge the way people in neighborhoods coexist with things that are larger than them and that they have not chosen, which is to say carefully and without loudness. Han Geum-ja had also, for reasons the letter did not fully explain, but gestured at with the circumspect phrasing of someone writing about things that don't have clean categories, known things. She wrote about this briefly and without apology, describing it the way you describe a chronic condition. It was there, it had been there since her childhood. It was not something she had sought or cultivated, and it was not something she fully understood, and she had spent most of her life trying to decide whether the responsible use of it was to act on it or to stay quiet. She had mostly stayed quiet, but she had told her granddaughter some things. She had told her granddaughter about a man on the hill who had a broken body and a harder heart, and she had told her that the heart was the one that needed the work, and that the body would follow if the heart moved first. She had also written about Lee Sang-wook. She had known Lee for 30 years, which was how long Lee had operated in these hills, which predated the Black Dragon and predated Hwang and predated every current organization, Lee being the particular kind of figure who precedes everything because he has made himself into infrastructure rather than operation. She had known what Lee was. She had also known that Lee had recently learned, through his 30 years of embedded neighborhood intelligence, that Han Gyum-ja's granddaughter was coming to Korea, that the granddaughter had the knowing to a degree Han Gyum-ja herself had not, and that Lee intended to be in position when the girl arrived because Lee understood, as Lee always understood, that the thing with the most value in any landscape is the thing that cannot be replicated or manufactured or bought through ordinary channels. She had written the letter to counterbalance that, to ensure that when the time came, Taijin would know what Lee knew about Amara, and to ensure he would know one other thing, that Lee's interest in the girl was not exploitation in the crude sense. Lee was 61 years old. Lee had a son who had been in a facility in Bundang for 11 years with a spinal injury of his own, sustained in a car accident when the boy was 19. Lee had spent 11 years looking for exactly what Taejin had found on a Tuesday night in January. Lee Sang-wook did not want to control Amara. He wanted what Taejin had wanted, underneath everything. Underneath the empire and the chair and the 20 years of survival, he wanted his child back. Yoon set down the closure strips. The room was very quiet. He called you this morning to position himself as a rational alternative to Hwang, she said, but the real ask was always going to be the same one. Yes, Taejin said, and Hwang. Hwang heard the story and saw the asset. That's all Hwang is. He folded the letter. Hwang is manageable. Lee is... He stopped, thought about it. Lee is someone I need to sit across from. She looked at him for a long moment, at the letter in his hands, at his legs, visible below the desk, the right one still with that slight outward list of a limb whose neurology is renegotiating its own terms. What are you going to do? She said. Not about Lee, about all of it. He looked at the window. It was past 11 now, and the crowd sound from below the wall had changed again. Lower, more dispersed, the sound of people who have been standing for hours and are beginning to resolve into smaller groups, some leaving, some staying, the collective organism of it redistributing its weight. On the monitor grid, the gate camera showed the outer lane less dense than it had been at 5 o'clock. The media vans still there, but their crews increasingly concentrated near their equipment rather than at the gate. Tonight, he said, I'm going to sit in a conference room with my operational leads and begin the process of separating what this organization owns from what it does. He paused. That's going to take time, more time than tonight, but tonight is when it starts. He looked at the letter. Tomorrow, I'm going to meet Lee Sang-wook and tell him that the girl is not available, to him, to Hwang, to anyone. And I'm going to tell him why in terms he'll understand, which is to say in terms of what happens to anyone who approaches her. Another pause. And then I'm going to tell him what the letter says about his son, because she deserves to know the full situation. And he deserves to know the full situation. And what he does with it after that is between him and whatever he believes about what is and isn't possible. Yoon looked at him. You're going to offer to let him meet her. I'm going to tell him the truth, Tae-jin said, that I don't own the girl, that nobody owns the girl, that if she chooses to meet him, that's her choice and her mother's and mine to facilitate, or not based on whether it's safe for her. He put the letter back in his pocket. Lee will understand that framing. It's the only one that ends this without further escalation. In the morning, Hwang's perimeter withdrawal came at 6:42. Ryu's exterior team tracked the heat signatures leaving the ridge one by one until the grid was clean. Hwang had made his calculation in the night. The courtyard footage that the exterior display had broadcast to 600 people and which had subsequently been picked up by 4 different news outlets and was now on the national morning cycle, showed Kang Tae-jin walking across a lit courtyard and standing between his guards and a 6-year-old girl and facing down an unauthorized entry with the deliberate positioning of a man who has decided what he is protecting. It also showed, incidentally, Hwang Sung-do's operatives retreating. The optics of extracting a child from a compound while a wheelchair-bound crime boss walked to stop. You had not apparently looked better after a night of media circulation. Hwang would recalculate, he always recalculated, but he would not move again in the near term because the near term was too visible, and Hwang's primary asset was the low profile that visibility destroyed. The conference room meeting ran from midnight until 3:40 in the morning. Tae-jin did not sit in the wheelchair for it. He sat in the conference chair at the head of the table, the same chair he had sat in for 31 years of operational meetings in one iteration or another, and he told his operational leads what the next 12 months were going to look like. Not a speech, not a declaration. He laid it out the way he laid out operational plans, item by item, with timelines and resource allocations and the specific contingency planning of someone who had spent his adult life understanding that the distance between intention and outcome is managed rather than wished. The pharmaceutical distribution contracts would be wound down over 6 months. The port freight, the legitimate portions, which were substantial and had been substantially legitimate for years, would be restructured under a holding company that could withstand regulatory scrutiny. The operations that could not survive restructuring would be divested or dissolved. The people in those operations would be offered either legitimate employment within the restructured entities or, where that was not feasible, severance structured to give them options. Choi asked about the organizations that had paid tribute to Black Dragon. What happened to those relationships? Tae-jin said, they become business relationships or they don't continue. We're not collecting tribute from anyone in 12 months. If they want to operate in this city, they operate legitimately or they find their own problems. Choi absorbed this. Hwang won't accept that framing. Hwang's options are going to narrow significantly over the next 6 months, Tae-jin said. We have documentation on 14 of his operations that the Organized Crime Bureau would find very useful. That documentation becomes a management tool, not a weapon. Unless Hwang makes it necessary to be a weapon. Legal was quiet for a moment. Then, you're describing a complete operational transformation of an organization that has existed in its current form for 31 years. Yes, Tae-jin said. 12 months for the primary restructuring. Longer tail on the secondary elements. I want a legal structure in place that I can put my name on. He paused. My actual name. He met Lee Sang-wook the following afternoon in a building in Yongsan that Lee maintained as a legitimate real estate office, and that was, in every meaningful way, also a room where Lee met people he needed to meet without anyone else being aware of the meeting. The room was on the 14th floor and had windows on 3 sides and looked out at Seoul from the kind of height that makes the city's density comprehensible in a way it isn't from the ground. Lee was smaller than he seemed on the phone. This was always true of people whose primary presence was vocal. They calibrated larger in imagination than in person. He was lean, gray-haired, dressed with the quiet expensiveness of someone who spends money in ways that don't announce themselves. And he stood at the window when Tae-jin came in and turned around with the unhurried ease of a man who has arranged his life so that things come to him rather than the reverse. He looked at Tae-jin walking across the room without a wheelchair, and his expression changed. Not dramatically. A small shift in the region around his eyes, a fractional adjustment of the set of his mouth, the kind of change that occurs in people who have spent decades controlling their faces when something arrives that bypasses the controls. They sat across from each other at a table that had nothing on it. "The letter," Lee said. "Yes, Hangeumja." He said the name with the weight of someone who has been carrying it a long time. "She died 8 months ago. I paid for her burial through intermediaries because she wouldn't have accepted it directly." "She knew you for 30 years, Tae-jin said. "Since before you were in this business," Lee said. She was a woman who knew things and kept most of them to herself, and occasionally, when she decided the situation required it, she used them." He looked at his hands on the table. "She told me about the girl 2 years ago. She told me Amara had the same ability she had, stronger, and that the girl would come to Korea eventually because Nadia, the mother, had run out of options in Chicago, and Korea was the next option. She told me that when the girl arrived, she would go to the hill." He paused. "She told me she had already told the girl about the man on the hill." "She told you all of that?" "Yes." He looked up. "She also told me that if I moved on the girl, if I tried to use her, to take her, to control the situation in the way that I control situations, she would make sure that the documentation she had on 30 years of Eastern Compass Alliance operations would reach every relevant authority simultaneously." A pause. "She had been collecting it for 30 years. She was very thorough." Tae-jin looked at him. "She played you. She played everyone," Lee said, and something in his voice on the word everyone had a texture that was not quite admiration and not quite grief. "She set the board so that the only way any of us could get what we actually wanted was to behave correctly." He looked at the window. At Seoul. "I am 61 years old. My son has been in a facility in Bundang for 11 years. I have spent 11 years trying to buy what cannot be bought and arrange what cannot be arranged. I am not a man who is accustomed to running out of options." He looked back at Tae-jin. "And then an old woman in a neighborhood told me there was a child who might be able to do what 11 years and more money than I want to calculate could not, and also told me there was nothing I could do to get to that child except sit down and wait and behave." Tae-jin sat with that for a moment. The embedded asset, Kim Yong-soo. "I needed to know when she arrived," Lee said. "I wasn't going to move on her, I needed to know." "You were going to ask me?" "Yes." "So ask," Tae-jin said. Lee looked at him for a long moment. The smooth, unhurried quality of his manner had not disappeared, but underneath it now something else was visible. Not vulnerability exactly, but the specific quality of a man setting down a management tool and speaking without it for the first time in a long time. "I would like to meet her," he said, "with her mother's permission and yours. In whatever context and with whatever conditions you determine are appropriate." He paused. "I'm not asking for a guarantee. I understand that I have no standing to ask for guarantees. I'm asking for the possibility." Tae-jin looked at him, at the window, at Seoul beyond it. "That's not my decision," he said. "I'll bring you her mother's answer." Nadia Brooks sat in the north guest room with her feet pulled up on the chair and a cup of tea the kitchen staff had brought her, and she listened to Tae-jin explain the situation with the contained, watchful attention of a woman who has raised a child alone in foreign countries on insufficient money and has learned to assess risks with the specific accuracy that survival calibrates. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What did you decide to do with her when she first walked in?" "I fed her," he said. "That was the extent of my plan. And then she touched my knees, and I felt the floor," he said. "And the plan changed." Nadia looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at Amara, who was sitting on the bed in the corner of the room, reading something on the cracked screen phone with the complete absorption of a child who has exhausted the excitement of the previous night's events and returned to her own interior life. "She's been doing this since she was 4, Nadia said, quieter. "Not this exactly, but small things. Her grandmother said to let it happen and not make it into something it wasn't. She said it would find its own shape." She wrapped both hands around the teacup. I didn't know she came here the first night. She told me she was in bed. She looked at Amara. Baby. Amara looked up from the phone. You heard what he asked. Yes, Amara said. She put the phone down. She considered it with the same focused seriousness she brought to everything. His son, she said. How old is he? 30, Taejin said. She nodded slowly. It's different when people are older, she said. It takes longer. My grandma said the older the body, the longer it takes to remember how. She looked at her mother. But it works. Nadia looked at her daughter for a long moment with an expression that contained about 15 years of maternal complexity in it. Then she looked at Taejin. One meeting. Here, not his place. I'm in the room. And she stops when she says she needs to stop. For any reason. No questions. Yes, he said. And after that, she said, we go home. Our home. And this, whatever this is, doesn't follow us there. He looked at her steadily. I'm going to have your building's security upgraded. Not monitored. Upgraded. New locks, camera coverage on the entrance, a contact number for my people that you can call at any hour. He paused. That's not negotiable, and it's not a condition. It's what happens now. She looked at him. Why? Because Huang knows where you live, he said. And because knowing that and doing nothing about it is not something I'm willing to do. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. One nod. Clean. Lee Sang-wook's son was named Lee Jun-seo, and he arrived at the estate 3 days later in a medical transport vehicle with 2 nurses and the particular stillness of someone who has spent 11 years being transported by other people and has made an accommodation with it. He was thin, 30 years old, with his father's controlled face, and something in his eyes that his father's eyes didn't have, a quality that Taejin recognized from the inside as the specific thing that 11 years in a chair does to the part of a person that is not the chair. Lee Sang-wook did not come. He sent his son because his son was the point of this, and because his presence would have made the room into something different from what it needed to be, and because Lee Sang-wook, for all his smooth management of everything, understood when a situation required him to be absent from it. Amara sat across from Jun-seo in the main sitting room with the medical staff and Nadia and Taejin and Dr. Yoon present. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back at her with the careful, defended expression of a man who has been through enough hope to be cautious about it. Does it hurt? She said. All the time? He looked at her, then despite himself. The parts that feel, yeah. She nodded. She reached across and put her hands on his knees. He looked at her hands. At the top of her head, the tight black coils of her hair. At her pink coat, which she was still wearing because it was still winter and she hadn't yet gotten a new one. His jaw tightened. Then it loosened. Then his eyes went somewhere that was not the room. Yoon's tablet, running the portable nerve monitor with the lead she had attached before the session, showed a reading that she looked at, and then looked at again, and then placed face down on the chair beside her and did not pick up again for a long time, because some things are better observed than documented. 6 months later, the Kang Foundation opened its first rehabilitation center in northern Seoul, 3 kilometers from the estate, in a building that had been a decommissioned textile facility and had been converted at a cost that Taejin's financial people described as aggressive and that Taejin described as the beginning. The center provided spinal cord injury rehabilitation, pediatric neurological care, and housing assistance for immigrant families at no cost to the patients. The waiting list reached 300 in the first week. Taejin walked to the opening. Not steadily, not without the cane that Yoon had prescribed, and that he had accepted with less resistance than she had expected, but walked across the parking area, through the entrance, down the main corridor where the staff had lined up, and where the patients who were already in residence had gathered in the common room with the careful, complicated expressions of people who understand that a moment is significant without yet knowing exactly how. Amara walked beside him. She was 7 now, almost 8, and she had acquired a new coat. Dark blue, a size too large, chosen apparently because she liked the pockets. And she walked with her hands in those pockets and her chin up and the same focused, unsentimental attention she had brought to everything since the night she stood outside an iron gate in a snowstorm with a practical proposal. "Is this what you wanted it to look like?" she asked. He looked at the corridor, at the patients, at the staff in their clean uniforms moving with the purposeful efficiency of people doing work they believe in, at the windows at the end of the hall letting in the flat winter light of a Seoul January, 365 days from the night she knocked. "No," he said. "It's better." She looked up at him. She didn't smile. Amar's face didn't run to easy smiles, which was one of the many things about her that was exactly like him and not like him at all simultaneously. She just looked, with those direct level eyes that had looked at him across a dining table the first night and seen something he hadn't known was visible. My grandma would have liked it, she said. Tell me about her sometime, he said. The whole thing, not just what she told you about me. She was very stubborn, Amara said, and she kept good records. She paused. She said the only difference between a criminal and a citizen is what they decide to do with what they already have. He walked another few steps in silence. The cane on the stone floor made a sound with each step. A rhythm, irregular but present, the sound of movement in a body that was not repaired but was working, which is a different thing from repaired and, in some ways, more valuable. She wasn't wrong, he said. At the end of the corridor, the common room opened up, and the patients inside turned to look, and the sound of the place, voices, equipment, somewhere a child laughing, came forward to meet them, and Kang Tai-jin, who had built an empire through fear and spent 20 years in a chair and had his life walked into by a 6-year-old in a pink coat on a Tuesday in January, kept moving toward it, one step, then the next, the cane finding the floor answering back.